It's June 19th. What is the time? It's 8:14 in the morning. And 10 years ago today, I was supposed to walk at my high school graduation, and I had plans to get a haircut. I don't remember a lot about my last day of high school. I was number 33 in the class and only had one lens of my glasses the last 2 years. Um, I did everything you could think of. I got sober after being overprescribed narcotics and went to church 3 days a week at a Pentecostal evangelical church. I was an art student who wanted to be a doula and a nurse and one day a midwife, and I'm still a third of the way there. And I was in after school activities like doing Joe support virtually and skipping school to sleep with girls who I've never met prior to that day, and had a long distance girlfriend for almost 2 years who lived in Alberta, Canada. And I'm 90% sure that I did love her very much. But I wrote for a magazine that was nationally syndicated for sexual health. I wrote for the school newspaper, and I think I wrote one article for the town's newspaper, and by senior year I was working as I did multiple rounds of internships that involved me working in HIV for the first time, something I would do for 4 years later on. And despite all of that beautifulness, I had a very difficult home life, and that transition to being who I am as a butch is not something my parents liked. I was the only non-boy and 4 kids, and the only one who wasn't left-handed either. And my parents didn't like me very much, which is an understatement. And when my grandmother lived with us most of the year, those were the only times I knew I could do safe things in my house. I was expected to clean and cook and iron. At church, I was expected to take care of children and help with whatever I could. I was being groomed to be a translator because it was a primarily Latino Caribbean church, and we were Dominican. My mom has always been my biggest hater. Nothing I could do or say was good, but it was also just that she couldn't do a lot of the things that I wanted to do. She kept me from a lot of things. But by the time I had graduated from high school, she had threatened to kick me out when it was 9 degrees out. She had threatened to send me to Dominican Republic to conversion therapy. I was outed twice. And the first time I was outed, I was 12 years old. And I had to convince her that I would change. And the second time was with a high school guidance counselor named Mrs. Lynch Correnti. And she wasn't even a guidance counselor. She was just placed in that position. And she called my mom, I guess knowing that she was a teacher, and had said that you better clean that whole house, and also your kid is gay, and I think you should do something about that. That was 2011. So for the following 4 years, until I graduated high school, I wasn't allowed to do anything. I was controlled severely. Everything I did was in secret. I lived a double life, going to church, having long, beautiful hair that my mom made me straighten every weekend. And I was dating, I was going out, I was skipping school. I had 38 excused absences. And mostly because I was also a very sickly kid. I was getting sick with upper respiratory infections, chest infections. I got my tonsils and adenoids removed at 10 years old. But I had shingles when I was 13, and I was overprescribed narcotics for 3 years. and I took myself off of it. They didn't seem to care whether I lived or died, and then if I almost died, that's when they cared. The only time I ever got taken care of when I was sick, which was often, um, was if my grandmother was there, but she also had her health issues. When she passed away due to complications of COPD and an asthma attack when I was 17, about to turn 18, and I knew I couldn't safely be in that house. So I started saving up, and I worked at a furniture store, and I promptly got fired for being queer, but the owner thought that being feminine at the time means that I could change too. And that was 2014. But my parents are married to each other because they're exactly the same kind of person. One is a more subdued version of the other, and my dad is a quiet version of my mom. And I didn't really have a lot of defenses back then besides being angry and lashing out and hiding. And when I would skip school, it was the only time I had freedom, and I would go to New York City from New Jersey. I'd take the PATH train, be there in 20 minutes. I met a lot of beautiful people, and a lot of older queer people told me that it will get better, and I believed them, and I didn't know why. Learned about astrology when I was 16, and that was because I was going to the LGBT Center in Manhattan. Someone's like, oh, earth signs are so severe. Capricorns, oh. But that was the first time I saw that my life will get better. Even if it wasn't real, I felt like that's something I could believe in that's tangible. And unlike the fire and brimstone of Jesus, I had something, because these are just data sets. I was born on that day and that time. This was what the sky looked like. And if that's true, and some other things can be too, I persevered through a lot of things. But when I went to graduate from high school, I actually got a haircut that was too short after having cut my hair off on January 31st, being threatened with my life. They refused to let me be seen. And I looked really good. I looked so good. And they just couldn't do it. And I was the first person in my family to graduate with honors on both sides. And I was number 33 in the class, even with one lens. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I had glasses, or I didn't have to go to school early at night so I could finish all my schoolwork. Or if I didn't have to basically live at the library to get my stuff done. But 33 is nothing to sneeze at, really, but my parents made me sick with stress. And they didn't let me go to my graduation. My mom destroyed my cap that I made and said that she didn't want me to be seen by anybody, and that I'd embarrassed her. My dad was quiet about it. My brother tried to get me to go to school first, because he picked me up for my haircut and was like, you know what they'll say, but I'm not saying those things. You know what they'll say. And I got my phone taken away. I got my passport stolen. I got my social security card taken under the guise of being forced to start college, even though I didn't want to that year. Plans to get state residency in New York and go to school there. And that took a year, and I needed a break. I basically worked 3 jobs for a year and was grieving my grandmother still so severely. And I was in therapy, and I would sneak out to go to therapy. In New York City, where I had to lie that I was a state resident, which I'm grateful they let me do that. My graduation was the beginning of 6 weeks of torture, systematically and functionally. I couldn't leave the house, couldn't talk to anybody, couldn't go to church. My parents made me wear a wig when I left the house, and I have many photos of that, as difficult as they are to look at. And then they forced me to go to Spain, which I thought was random, but then I found out they were taking all these photos of me having fun, smiling, and they put it on Facebook to say, oh, she wanted to go to Spain instead of her graduation. Meanwhile, they didn't let me talk to anybody, look at anybody. They made me figure out where we were at all times. And I've had 3 or 4 different therapists say that they legally kidnapped me because I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know how long I was staying. I didn't know what was happening, and I didn't have my passport. It took me another 3 weeks to find my passport, all of my clothes that I had packed to leave. Told them I was leaving. And they said, you're not going anywhere. And they stole all of my things again. And they forced me to stay home. And then they let me go to church. And they let me see one friend who they harassed so much when I moved out. They tried to call the police. And they got my text records and found her number and where she lived and harassed her. And we couldn't speak anymore. And that is still the hardest friendship I've ever lost. And when I moved out, it was a holiday called Unveiling Day. The first one in the Satanic Church, celebrating religious plurality. And also survivors of religious abuse. And that's the day I moved out of the house. And I left at 6 in the morning. And my hair was grown out, but I still looked good. And I had a backpack, a Build-A-Bear, the only one I've ever had when I was 9. My documents that I stole back, and a cell phone that I immediately destroyed the SIM card for. Now, I'm not going to say everything was easy. That was likely the worst year that I've had, that I'll ever have, only because I'm working very hard. But I know that you make plans and God laughs. I'm hoping for love and kindness. But as an astrologer, the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen is that my Saturn return starts in 2 days, on the brightest day of the year. Brighter days are coming for me, and they're already here. I'm not 18 anymore. I'm not a homeless teenager with parents who stalk them and harass them. I'm not abused by anybody. I did EMDR. I'm in somatic therapy. I'm working hard for a beautiful life. I even got a bachelor's degree in public health. I've been a doula for 7 years in 1 day. Things get better, but sometimes they're worse for a second. And I think that's just the universe telling me I had to stay put. I wasn't meant to suffer. Life isn't supposed to be hard all the time. And that was a mantra of mine for 8 years. I am not put here to suffer. And now my new mantra is, life isn't supposed to be hard. Things can be easy sometimes. The love you have for others is the love you have for yourself. And to be kind, to be radically kind, and having boundaries will make life worth living. And please ask for help if you have help that can be got. And even if you don't know who can help you, the worst they can say is, I don't know. You deserve a better life, whoever's watching. I don't know who will. But I love you, If no one else does, I do. I'm proud of myself. And I'm excited for a future that I get to rebuild, because I've done it before. And one day I'll be a midwife, and I'll get to tell a scared teenager, hey, I've been through this too. You got this. I love you. I do.